Hey everyone, welcome back to Criminology. Today we're going to discuss the construction of deviance. For the purposes of this lecture, we're going to use the example of how society treats single parents. Specifically, we'll talk about the differences and double standards between single mothers and single fathers. Then we'll go over the implications of those standards. Next, we'll apply the feminist theory to this situation. And finally, we'll go over some lessons we can learn from this. Now, I don't know how many of you are raised by single parents, but the number of children raised by single parents in the US continues to grow. This includes me. My mom was a single mom for a while, and so were some of my other family members. According to the US Census Bureau data from 2022, about 23% of children live in single parent households. The District of Columbia has the highest amount of kids raised in single parent households at 33.3%, while Utah has the lowest, which is 12.8%. Historically speaking, mothers have always been seen as more naturally nurturing and capable of fulfilling caretaking roles. On the other hand, fathers were seen as not as capable. Maybe this is because in the 1950s, men typically worked outside the home to make a living while the women were homemakers and cooked, cleaned, and cared for the children. However, over time, families became more diverse and there are more normalized family types today rather than just the typical nuclear family. Unfortunately, the gender roles of men and women have been perpetuated through time and applied to the context of single parent families. This means that mothers are held to an incredibly high standard and expected to do it all, while fathers are praised for doing even basic parenting tasks. Both are subject to stereotypes. Moms are expected to be super mom, while not much is expected of dads because most of society sees them as inept. As you can see, there are very obviously harmful double standards present here. So what does all this mean? What are the implications of these double standards? Well, let's take a look. Since moms are held to a higher standard than dads in society, they are more likely to be subject to harsh criticism, judgment, and extra scrutiny. On the other hand, dads are treated like they're incapable, so they constantly feel like they have to prove themselves to others. However, they're more likely to be praised and given sympathy and support. In public places, whether their children are behaving or having to be disciplined for misbehavior, that would be considered a good dad by societal standards, and he might get compliments from strangers. Yet if you put a single mom in the same situation, she's less likely to be praised by others because she's seen as just doing her job as a parent. Single moms are expected to be heavily involved in their children's lives, and people are more critical of them if they can't always show up for things like school plays, soccer tournaments, band concerts, field trips, or even PTA meetings. Single dads are given more grace, so if they show up to even one of these events, that's enough to satisfy others' perceptions of them. So at this point, I'm sure you're asking, what does this have to do with the construction of deviance? Well, in Chapter 3 of our textbook, we learned that constructionism doesn't exactly start with asking why people are deviant. Instead, it looks at how deviance is formed and defined. What does it look like? What is implied when people engage in a specific type of deviance? There are lots of different components of constructionism, so let's first look at conflict theory. Conflict theorists argue that the powerful people in society make the rules and laws to benefit themselves. They are not made to serve the interests of everyone, only a select few. Good states that society is divided into many caucuses, factions, segments, sectors, classes, groups, or categories, and they all have very different interests, so it's near impossible to serve them all. The feminist theory is a type of conflict theory that emphasizes the conflict between men and women. Androcentrism is a male-centered bias, and patriarchy is a male-dominated power structure. So the feminist theory focuses on the roles of sex and gender on deviance. Good asks, how do men express and maintain their dominance by defining and enforcing certain actions as deviant and criminal? So feminists want to figure out how and why women are being treated differently than men. So putting this together with the concept of single parenthood, you can see the conflict between single moms and single dads and how they are treated differently by society. There is a lot of stigma associated with being a single parent, but single moms are more likely to be labeled as bad, lazy, irresponsible, uneducated, reckless, etc. Single dads, on the other hand, might be seen as inept by some, but they're more likely to be labeled as brave and courageous for taking on this role. Feminists seek a more equal society, so they would want single moms and single dads to be treated the same. Either way, it's difficult to raise children by yourself, so why is there a divide between men and women? It's been constructed as more deviant for one group than the other by society. After going through all of this, let's think about how we can apply these concepts to our lives. I think we can start by being empathetic towards others and breaking the stigma surrounding single parents. Think about the various struggles they experience. It's incredibly difficult to balance work, time with your kids, grocery shopping, paying bills, and having personal time, especially if you're doing it all alone. It's much harder if people are judging and criticizing every move you make. Let's instead be supportive, and let's be conscious of our own biases as well as the biases present in society. Stop and think about why they exist and where they come from, and be aware of conflicts and double standards between groups. What other double standards of deviance can you think of in our society? So to recap, during this lecture, we talked about the societal double standards between men and women when it comes to being single parents. We discussed how unequal those standards are, and we went through what the implications of these things are with both men and women individually and men and women at large. Then we applied this to the conflict theory we learned about in Chapter 3 of our textbook, and we expanded that to include the feminist theory as well, which emphasizes inequality between the sexes. And finally, we went over some things we could learn and apply to our personal lives. Thanks for listening, and until next time.